In this video, I'll be demonstrating about recipe management object from Machine Builder libraries. So let's first understand what is a recipe. Recipe is a set of machine settings used to produce a product. Consider you have a machine that produces three different size products. These products have different parameter settings which can be stored as recipes. Like shown here, there are three different products which has three different recipes, recipe A, recipe B and recipe C. So whenever you need to produce a product, just load the respective recipe and the machine is good to go. So with recipe management object, it's easy to manage multiple recipes in an application. The recipes are stored in controller memory. The object caters to most of the application requirement with functions like load, edit, save, create new and more. Using configuration parameter, you can choose to enable or disable functions as per your application requirement. The object or faceplate does not need any modification based on number of recipes in recipe memory. While a recipe is active, you can view or edit another recipe without disturbing the active recipe. This helps in scenarios where you want to either prepare a recipe for next changeover or just refer a parameter setting of a different recipe. The HMI faceplate comes with status, warnings, and animation to help user avoid any illegal operation. Other than HMI, you can also load a recipe through controller logic. This is helpful when a recipe ID is received from a remote server and the load function is to be commanded by controller logic. A recipe can be marked as protected in the controller to prevent editing or deleting from HMI. One practical application is to protect the machine default settings that come from OEM. The object has load permissive input to permit the recipe load from HMI. This input can be linked to machine stop status, so operator can only load a recipe when machine is in stop state. Let's take a look at a demo of recipe management object implementation. What you see here is a sample application by MBL team showing implementation of various MBL objects. I launched the user display for recipe. This display is to be designed by user and not part of the library. This has the parameters of active recipe. So when a recipe is loaded, the active recipe values will be displayed here. I launched the recipe management faceplate, which is part of the library. A quick overview. This is the home tab. Top shows the status and warning messages. Active and edit recipe names and IDs will be displayed here. The recipe part of the recipe memory is shown in the recipe list. This is the ID and name. This shows whether the recipe is active or being edited. The letter P means the recipe is preserved from editing or delete. You can search for a recipe ID or recipe name from the search field. The home tab has basic commands like load and save active. I'll open the settings tab. The settings tab has more advanced commands like create new, rename, cancel, edit, save edit, promote and demote. The information tab shows warning and error codes and their respective help messages. The help tab shows a basic help about the faceplate and the indications. Let's go to the home tab and load a recipe. I'll select product B 500 grams and press load. Let's confirm the action. You can see the message shows press confirm to overwrite the active. That means the current active recipe will be overwritten by product B 500 grams. Let's confirm the same. Now you can see the indication is shown on product B 500 grams. Let's close the faceplate and start the machine. Since the machine is running now, I'll demonstrate load permissive. The load permissive input is connected to machine stop status. So when the machine is running, the load button will be disabled. This prevents from accidental loading of recipe while the machine is running. To save the active recipe back to recipe memory, you can use save active command. confirm the same to save it. I'll go to the settings tab. Since product B 500 grams is active, we cannot edit the same. So we will select a different recipe. Let's select product C 400 grams. To edit, we press the edit command button. Now the recipe is moved to the edit recipe tag. I'll close the recipe faceplate. You can see the edit recipe values are displayed right next to the active. Displaying the edit recipe next to the active helps user to refer parameter of both edit and active recipe. I'll go back to the recipe management faceplate. To save the edited recipe, we can use save edit command, or if we don't intend to save, then we can just select the edit recipe and then press cancel button. For now, I'll do a save. These three functions, create new, rename and cancel, are common for recipe active, recipe edit and recipe memory. Create new is like a save as function. So to create a new recipe from active recipe, let's select the active recipe button and press create new. The recipe ID is generated automatically for the new recipe. We need to give a new name. I've given product X and confirm the action. Now we have a new recipe which is saved from the active recipe. Similar to save as, now this recipe is linked to the active recipe. So any more modifications done in active recipe and saved will be saved to the product X recipe. To rename a recipe, use the rename command. I'll quickly demonstrate. I'll select the recipe memory and select product D 100 grams. I'll click the rename button. We can rename ID, name or both. Let's try changing the ID. I'll give an ID which is already existing in the list, which is 1005, and try confirming. You can see the recipe ID is already existing, so it will not take the same ID. I'll give a different ID, 1006, and say confirm. Now you can see product D 100 grams has a new ID which is 1006. The third button has different function based on the selection of radio button. For active, it's unload. This will clear the active recipe parameters and delink it from the loaded memory recipe. Since the machine is running, I cannot unload at the moment. Let me stop the machine and demonstrate unload. Now you can unload the active recipe. Give a confirmation. You can see all the active recipe parameters are now 0. For edit, it's cancel. This will clear the edit recipe parameters and delink from the memory recipe to be edited. So when you need to save and close the edit recipe, first do save edit and then cancel to close. Now there is no recipe in edit. For recipe memory, this button is delete. It will delete the recipe from the memory. Let's select the product X and delete. Give a confirmation and it will delete the recipe. Now you can see the product X recipe is deleted from the list. The promote and demote commands can be used to rearrange the recipes in the recipe memory. You can move the recipe up in the list using promote or down using the demote. To search a recipe, enter the recipe name or its ID in the search field. Partial entry of recipe name is also allowed. Let's enter 250 in the search field and press search. You can see product A 250 gram recipe is searched as the result. Let's do a search next to see if any more recipe with 250 as a name is available. Since there is no other recipe with the name 250, it's end of search. We'll also search a recipe ID. I have entered 1006 as the ID to be searched. Let's press search button. You can see the 1006 recipe is searched as the result. Let's do a search next. Since there is only one recipe with the recipe ID 1006, there is no other result shown. I'll show you the logic side implementation of the recipe object. The recipe object is implemented as a program. Let me open the parameter and local tags. This is the tag that is to be interfaced with the application code. Here I have a filler section where the user data, filler delay and fill speed are coming from the recipe active data. I'll also demonstrate how a recipe load is commanded from logic. This is only required when a machine logic is used to select a recipe ID and commanded to load, and not when recipe is loaded from HMI. Here I have a load sequence in the unit module. This code is not part of the library but has to be developed by user. So what you see here is a load recipe from logic command which checks for the recipe active permissive, and then the sequence is triggered. In the step 1, we move the recipe ID to be loaded into input load recipe ID tag, and in step 2 we latch the command load. In step 3 we wait for status load done or status error. Let's load the recipe ID 1000 from the control interface. I'll toggle this bit. You can see the status load done is received. That means the recipe ID 1000 is now the active recipe. If you take a look at the recipe management faceplate, the status message says load done, product A 250 grams by control interface. So this tells the operator that the recipe load has been commanded by the control interface. In this section, I'll demonstrate how to instantiate a recipe object in Application Code Manager. The ACM already has the machine library registered. You need to download the library from Rockwell Automation Product Compatibility and Download Center page. I have already created a project and added a controller and display. Let's go ahead and add the recipe object. To add the recipe object, right-click on the task and click Add New. You can see the recipe. Next. The recipe name can be left as default because most of the projects there is only one instance of recipe management. So let's look into the configuration part here. So the first parameter you see is recipe memory size. So depending on the number of recipes you want to store in the application, you can enter the recipe memory size. I'll go with 25. This parameter is to enable auto generation of recipe ID, confirmation watchdog time. Whenever you have a confirmation pop-up, if the confirmation pop-up is not answered for this time, then the action is cancelled. You can also choose for which commands you want a confirmation pop-up. So from these parameters, confirm load, save active, edit, save edit. You can also inhibit some of the commands. So for in your application, if you don't intend to use maybe let's say edit, then you can just inhibit edit and save edit. But for us, let's just leave it to the default. Let's add the ME display. So this is the display where navigation object for recipe faceplate will be placed. Let's finish it. To understand further about generating the code and display, watch the basics of ACM workflow video series. For more information, download Machine Builder libraries from Rockwell Automation website. Thanks for watching the video.